Alright everyone, welcome back to the third installment of Who Wins the Opening Level Race. Today, we're diving into the recently PC release God of War Ragnarok and putting it head to head with its predecessor, God of War 2018. We're gonna break down how each game introduces its gameplay mechanics, keeps you hooked, and overall does a better job at grabbing your attention from the very first level. So let's jump and see which Norse God of War game takes the crown. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which game you think nailed the opening level. Let's go. Okay, so here's the thing. Neither of these games actually has chapters, which makes it a bit tricky to say exactly where one part ends and another begins. For the sake of this comparison, I've decided to consider the first level or section of each game to be everything up until the first boss fight. That way we can have a more applies to applies comparison. God of War 2018 kicks off with Kratos, the God of War himself, chopping down a tree. Right off the bat, the game introduces this first gameplay mechanic, a simple button mashing sequence. You whack away at the tree with Kratos' axe until it finally falls. After a brief cutscene introducing Atreus, his son, Kratos hefts the log onto his shoulders, and we're off, learning the basics of movement as we navigate towards the boat. A quick tutorial on boat controls follows, then it's back to land as we carry the tree home. A dramatic extended cutscene later, we're out on the hunt with Atreus. Along the way, we get introduced to more gameplay mechanics like picking up items, vaulting over objects, gap jump, and of course the satisfying throw of Kratos' axe. Finally, here we encounter our first enemies. These standard foes serve as a tutorial for the core combat mechanics. We will learn to block with our shield, throw punches and kicks, dodge attacks, and generally get a feel for the game's combat system. So how does God of War Ragnarok kick off? Ragnarok begins with Kratos in a cave. The scene shifts to Atreus returning from a hunt. We're then introduced to a new gameplay mechanic, riding with two wolves. The cart riding mechanic is the first gameplay element introduced. As we progress, Freya attacks Kratos, triggering QTEs, the second mechanic we encounter. Failing these QTEs results in a rather interesting death animations for the character. After defeating Freya, we return home. Here, we take full control of Kratos and we can experiment with the Leviathan axe's attacks and even run. However, this doesn't last long as we're soon threaded to a lengthy cutscene that takes us back in time to a flashback where we accompany Faye. Aside from a simple interaction to open a path, nothing much happens here, and we're brought back to the present. We continue our journey to find Atreus and regain control of Kratos. This is where the gameplay ramps up, introducing more mechanics. Our first encounter with enemies in this game showcases a significant expansion of Kratos' Leviathan axe moveset. This increased variety ensures that combat feels fresh and engaging from very beginning. Beyond combat, we're introduced to a slew of new mechanics, throwing the axe, opening chests, jumping, crouching, climbing, and the powerful Frost Awaken ability are all at your disposal. Frost Awaken is a particularly satisfying mechanic that, when timed correctly, unleashes the full potential of the Leviathan axe and deals massive damage to enemies. Next up, we're introduced to the death from above mechanic, adding a vertical dimension to the gameplay. This allows Kratos to leap off ledges and perform powerful attacks on surrounding enemies with a simple button press. We will face off against a variety of enemies in this area, including foes armed with a sling that launch projectiles. There are also chests to loot along the way. Eventually, we will reach the game's first boss fight. Let's rewind to the God of War 2018. After our first encounter, we'll be introduced to chests that require a bit more puzzle solving. One such chest needs you to hit 3 specific objects with your axe before it opens. This marks our first introduction to this type of puzzle. As we continue our journey, we will encounter more enemies and come across the game's first main puzzle. After defeating the enemies and solving the initial puzzle, we join Atreus in taking down Udyr with his bow. This triggers a cinematic that leads us into our first boss fight, a troll. You'll need to utilize all the combat skills we've learned so far to take it down. Atreus' bow can also be used in this fight. Unlike other enemies, the troll's attacks can't be blocked with our shield, so you'll need to dodge to avoid its attacks. Finally, we'll finish the troll off with an execution, marking the end of the initial sequence in God of War 2018. So what about God of War Ragnarok? Our first boss encounter in Ragnarok is against Bjorn. The fight involves blocking yellow-colored attacks with our shield, while red attacks require dodging. Quick time events add an extra layer of excitement and variety to the combat. This is also where we introduced to Kratos' rage mode mechanic. After defeating the boss, we discovered that the bear was actually Atreus, leading to a cutscene. This concludes the initial sequence of God of War Ragnarok.
Stop thinking like a father for a moment and start thinking like a general!
No!
Alright, now that we've broken down the opening levels, which one takes the cake? The first thing I want to touch on is how long it takes to finish the initial stages on both games. God of War 2018 typically takes between 15 to 30 minutes to complete, while Ragnarok clocks in at around 30 to 45 minutes. While a longer duration isn't inherently a flaw, I do think Ragnarok could have had better pacing in this section. If the cutscenes were skippable and there were fewer walking segments in both games, this time could be significantly reduced. Both games had a lot of cutscenes that slow down the gameplay. That said, I should point out that not being able to run or use the Leviathan axe after Kratos and Atreus set off on their hunt is no different from the Faye flashback in Ragnarok, where player control is very limited and focuses more on storytelling. Ragnarok definitely has the upper hand when it comes to combat. The increased number of enemies provides more opportunities to learn combat mechanics. Kratos' Leviathan axe is even more fun to use thanks to the additional moves. The new mechanics like Death from Above and Frost Awaken bring a fresh dimension to the combat. While both games introduce similar mechanics such as platforming and using the axe to open paths, God of War 2018 stands out by introducing puzzles earlier in the game. There is a chess puzzle and another puzzle in the main path that gives you a better understanding of the game's overall puzzle design. In contrast, Ragnarok doesn't introduce any puzzles in the opening level. In terms of boss fight, mechanically, the Bjorn boss fight in Ragnarok is more refined. Unlike the troll encounter where you couldn't use your shield, Ragnarok introduces two distinct attack types for enemies. Attack marked in yellow can be blocked, while red attacks must be dodged. The addition of Kratos' rage mode is also a nice touch. While the troll, due to its size, might feel more like a traditional boss fight, the fight itself isn't as engaging as the Bjorn battle in Ragnarok. While both games follow a similar structure in the opening stages, there are subtle differences that makes it tough to crown a clear winner. Personally, I give the edge to God of War 2018, but that's not to say Ragnarok is any slouch. If we include the second boss fight as part of the opening level, I would say Ragnarok is overall more engaging. Ultimately, it comes down to personal preference. So what do you think, guys? Which game's opening did you enjoy more? If you like this video and want to support the channel, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Until next time.
I got it. Good.
It's still alive.
Your knife. No. Finish what you started.
I can't.